From Microbe TV, this is TWiP, This Week in Parasitism, episode 231, recorded on March 8th, 2024. I'm Vincent Racaniello, and joining me today from Fort Lee, New Jersey, Dixon DeComier.
Hello, Vincent, and everybody else. Happy spring, about a month early.
Yes, not officially spring. Also from New York, Daniel Griffin.
Hello, everyone. And yes, as predicted by our friend, the groundhog, we seem to be having an early spring, at least today. Just wait till Sunday when it is freezing cold.
Punxsutawney Phil, as he's known.
And from Glasgow, Scotland, Christina Nowla.
Hi, good evening, everybody. We're also having an early spring, although it is freezing today. So, yeah, it's nice though.
It's actually frozen. It's below freezing temperature.
It's just
Okay.
not quite. It feels freezing. It's an
Christina,
easterly wind, which is always cold.
Would you like to hear a poem about spring? It's very quick.
Yes.
Spring has sprung, the grass is riz. I wonder where the Boides is. Oh, no, the Boyd is on the wing. No, I'm sorry, the wing is on the Boyd.
Oh, Dixon. Is that a real poem?
Terribly so.
All right. Thank you very much. If you like what we do, and after that, maybe you don't like what we do on these programs,
Oh, they could pay me to shut up.
we could pay Dixon to be quiet. But we'd love your financial support to maintain these programs about science, which bring you science truth and not misinformation. You can go to microbe.tv/contribute, and your deduction, at least in the U.S., will be federal tax deductible. Also, check out Mark Martin's new podcast, Matters Microbial, at microbe.tv/mm. So today is a case study day. We're going to solve a case, and we're going to get, hopefully, a new one. So, Daniel, remind us what we have here.
All right. For those of you joining us for the first time and those tuning back in, we present a woman in her 40s who was referred to me to be seen in the office, sent to me from one of my colleagues. This woman reports that she has been having recurrent issues with worms exiting her anus and vagina since 2018. She reports that she lives with her husband and 4 children, and they have never reported any issues. She reports that initially she took something over the counter and things resolved. Then a couple of years later has this problem again, and this time discussed the problem with her housekeeper from El Salvador, who gave her an anti-parasitic tablet from her home country. This problem has now recurred. She was referred to a GI doctor who she explains laughed at her and suggested she see a psychiatrist. She comes in now very upset and tearful. She relates that she has this itching that wakes her up at night. She was able to take pictures of something that she found on the anus. She has photos as well as a video of a thin white, about 1 centimeter motile thing, with one of the ends actually coming to a point. She reports a normal, non-restrictive diet. She reports no travel outside of the United States or even outside of really this local tri-state New York area. She is otherwise healthy, no past medical history, no past surgical history, HIV negative. There is a family history of different cancers. She does not work outside the home, but she certainly works hard inside the home with her children. She reports no pets. She has an unremarkable exam and labs that are only notable for a low vitamin D.
All right, we had some number of case guesses this time. Dixon, can you begin?
I would be delighted. Aiel writes, Dear Vincent and the sages of the microscopic eukaryotes, G'day from Sydney, Australia, where the weather is hot and clammy. First, I would like to express how great it is to have double the monthly TWiP dose. It's at least twice as good. Second, I would like to thank the listener who mentioned that TWiP is like the game show, just for introverts. It's so true. You cracked me up. Thank you. Last month, I got my guess wrong. I'm fairly consistent at that. I place all the blame on myself for getting it wrong. However, I'm sure I could do better if I received the book I won about 2 years ago. No comment. We don't have too much information regarding this case this week, apart from a worm that looks like a thread, is sharp as a pin, and causes an itch at night. Does it rhyme with Mobius? I was about to ask if it rhymes with a two-dimensional shape in 3 dimensions that has only one face, but that would be like a bit of a pun too far. As always, thank you for all you do. Regards, Ayel.
You know, Ayel, I thought we had sent out all the back-ordered books because Kim here in the office has been doing that, but I'll go back and check, and we will get you one post-haste. Sorry about that.
Post-haste.
Christina, can you take the next one?
I can. Rafid writes, "Hello, TWiP team. Thank you for your great work. I believe that this woman has enterobius or pinworm. This is a common nematode in northern climates. Infection can be acquired in daycares and then go on to infect the parents. Mama worm comes out of the anus at night and lays her eggs, which can cause pruritus ani, causing the host to scratch the anus, get eggs under the fingers, and then auto-infect themselves when they eat. Also, the eggs fall off the anus as soon as you get out of bed, and bed sheets are also a common cause of reinfection. Sometimes mama worm gets lost and goes up the vagina or the female urethra and causes UTIs. Diagnosis is made by placing a sticky paddle on the anus upon waking up, before getting up and out of bed to look for the eggs and the occasional worm. Treatment is with albendazole and, even more importantly, hand washing and cleaning the environment, bed linen washing. As a side note, I'm disappointed in my medical colleagues and especially the GI colleague who did not pick up the diagnosis. Missing a diagnosis of fasciola is one thing. Missing this diagnosis for years is unacceptable. Even in the wilds of rural Quebec, on our test requisition form that includes standard biochemistry, hematology, serology, microbiology, etc., the only nematode test that you can check off is pinworm. I feel bad for this patient who had to endure what she did because of medical incompetence. We all have to do better. Thank you again for your wonderful podcast that has made me fall in love with parasites. Rafid.
Ariel. Jay writes, "Hello, TWIPsters. I'll start with a quotation. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Margaret Mead. Back to that soon, but first on with the case. Daniel was asked to see a tearful mother of 4 in her 40s who complained of worms exiting her anus and vagina over the past 6 years. She presented a high-quality video. Now, this is pinworm, Enterobius vermicularis. This nematode is extremely common among children under the age of 12. I suspect her children were the source of her exposure and re-exposure. It's not unusual that she was the only one in the house with itching, as most people are free of symptoms. Pinworms are usually confined to the lower GI tract, but aberrant vaginal infection has been described. In the colon, the worms feast on bowel bacteria such as E. coli. The female worms migrate to the perianal area and lay their eggs as the host sleeps. This leads to intense itching in some, but not all of those who are infected. When hygiene is less than ideal, as is often the case with young children, fingers go from an itchy anus to food or directly to the mouth. The eggs are ingested by self or others, and the cycle continues. Treatment is simple: albendazole or mebendazole with a second dose in 2 weeks. The entire household should be treated to break the cycle of transmission. This may be what the housekeeper gave her, but without treating the rest of the family, she got reinfected. The frustrating thing about this case was the GI physician who saw her earlier. I don't want to judge the physician too harshly. Perhaps he or she was distraught with their own life challenges and was not at their best that day. But they missed the mark by laughing at her and suggesting that her complaints were psychiatric. parasitosis is a thing. I probably meant to say delusional parasitosis is a thing, but it is a diagnosis of exclusion. In this patient's case, the evidence was clear and the cause was common. This infection should be well known to any healthcare provider. She deserves treatment delivered with kindness. Psychiatric conditions, including parasitosis, also deserves kindness. Treating pinworm is easy. Increasing knowledge and kindness, even among healthcare professionals, is more challenging. But TWiPsters, you are doing that work. You are fostering a love of learning and modeling kindness. You are Margaret Mead's group of thoughtful, committed citizens working to change the world. Albendazole treats pinworm, and the education you provide and the compassion you model is medicine to the hearts and minds of your listeners. Thank you as always. And that's Jay Gladstone, Chief Medical Officer out at APLA Health and Wellness in LA.
What a nice letter.
Yeah, thanks, Jay.
Very nice.
Thank you. David writes, greetings, TWiP team. Thank you to Dr. Griffin for presenting a case that I think I can actually make a reasonable guess at, based solely upon a search of the PDF version of Parasitic Diseases 7th edition that is readily accessible in my computer. Dr. Griffin's description of a white thread-like motile creature with a pointy end was about all I needed to quickly locate the probable suspect, in this case, pinworms. Case description, including the location of the infection and the worms, matches the PD 7th edition section covering pinworms to a T. I suspect the treatment patient took in the past and potentially the tablet provided by her housekeeper was pyrantel pamoate. That would probably work again, but maybe Dr. Griffin was able to prescribe albendazole or mebendazole as the treatment this time around. One thing that puzzles me is why others in the family have not reported any issues. Another thing is why the GI doc, of all people, did not diagnose this, instead wanted to send the poor woman to a psychiatrist. This patient was fortunate indeed to have seen Dr. Griffin. I think most of the listeners wish they could see Dr. Griffin when they encounter medical problems. Thanks as always for an entertaining and informative episode. I eagerly look forward to each one. David. Dixon, we are back to you.
Byron White writes, hello, TWiP hosts. Writing from Naperville, Illinois, where we have had a very mild winter, 44 F outside currently, but will climb to almost 70 F over the weekend. We just experienced tornadoes sweeping through Chicago and a couple of days in February. Crazy weather. Anyway, my guess for the cases for TWiP 229 is an infection of pinworm Anaerobius vermicularis. The symptom of itching at night and size of the worm all aligns with a typical pinworm infection. My guess is she probably obtained infection through the children in the same household. I have just listened to the last TWiP yesterday and realized this is a very short turnaround. Got to get my guess in this time. I do agree with Dr. Dixon DePommier. I strongly prefer paper book over electronic copy at any time. The feeling, the smell, and the sound of turning the page, just wonderful. Thank you again for everything you do to educate the public. The knowledge is priceless.
Christina.
Carol writes, presently I have to say I have no idea what parasite would cause this except Enterobius, although I have to say I have never heard of vaginal invasion. I was not happy to hear her GI doc laughed at her. Would he have taken his male patient more credible? My guess is some of the eggs were transmitted to this woman's vagina during sexual activity. I will look forward to hear everyone's take on this. Thanks. And that's from Carol.
Daniel.
All right. Is that Hakan? How do we pronounce that?
Hawken.
Okay. Hawken writes, hello and good morning. Slight change of pace, as instead of sunny Athens, I am now in sunny, albeit brisk, Madison, Wisconsin. Think it was 11 degrees Fahrenheit out when I wrote this. This week's case made me think of Oxyurus, given the small anus-dwelling worms that sometimes sneak out to explore the vicinity and sneak up on other parts or in the sheets, as well as the itchiness in the night. Having thankfully only been exposed that I know of to the horse variety, I had to look up what the human-specific genus species of pinworm was. Couldn't really come up with any other differentials than the human-specific one, Anaerobius vermicularis. So I settled on that one. White wigglers of the butt made me think briefly of Dipylidium caninum, But given this sounds more like a nematode than a cestode, and the symptoms fit better with the former, I rank this one much lower, which suggests a Scotch tape test for her and anyone else living in the home. Fun fact, the eggs can also be aerosolized due to their small size, according to the CDC website. Treatment would include a single dose of albendazole, mebendazole, or parental palmoate, followed up with a second dose 2 weeks later. Due to the significant risk of reinfection, it's important she wash hands thoroughly and regularly, as well as hot wash all clothing and sheets in the home she might have come into contact with, or, if housekeeper infection suspected, perhaps all of it, along with a stern discussion on the importance of hand washing in the household. Happy Leap Day. Thanks again for a fun case.
Joanne writes, Dear TWiP professors, I'm sure you will receive many letters correctly identifying the organism infecting Dr. Griffin's 40-something female patient who tearfully presented herself in his office with a video, which I'm sure she was embarrassed to share, that clearly shows the wiggling movement of a tiny 1-centimeter worm with a pointed tail. I'm 99.9% confident the worm in the video is Enterobius vermicularis, commonly known as the pinworm. The diagnosis is usually made by microscopically observing the characteristic oval flattened football eggs on a sticky paddle that was placed on the perianal and perineal skin early in the morning before the patient uses the toilet. Occasionally, the adult female worm can also be seen on the paddle filled with eggs. Pinworm infections are one of the most common parasitic infections in the United States. The infection can be asymptomatic, but I am surprised to hear that this woman's husband and 4 children don't have symptoms. It's disturbing to hear that this woman has suffered with this infection on and off since 2018 and needed to resort to self-treatment with an OTC and a one-time antiparasitic tablet from her housekeeper. It appears this woman and her housekeeper are better diagnosticians than her PCP and a GI physician who shockingly and unprofessionally laughed at her. My guess is that if she did go to a psychiatrist, the psychiatrist would have made the correct diagnosis, and Dr. Griffin would have received the consultation request from the psychiatrist. I suspect AI could also have made the correct diagnosis. Thank you for your educational podcasts. Sincerely, Joanne. Well, I have to say that I did ask AI, and it gives you 4 different possibilities. And then it tells you that it's not a doctor and you should seek medical advice.
Was any of the 4 correct?
We should save that. But yeah, I'm curious what it had to say.
I can tell you after we're done, because they save all my searches. All right, back to Dixon.
Anthony S. writes, maybe I should take the next 2. This is very short.
Yes, of course, Dixon.
Help all. I figure this is either pinworm or Acerus lumbricoides. Treatment of both these infections is 100 milligrams of benazole 2 times a day, morning and evening for 3 days. Anthony. Justin writes, hello all. This is my guess for the latest case involving a 1-centimeter motile creature detected from a woman in her 40s. This sounds like hookworm to me. She is American, and most likely the species would be N. americanus. Whatever the hookworm species may be, the treatment should be albendazole if available. I'm hoping this case was quickly resolved, and she was assured that seeking treatment was the correct response despite her earlier issues with the physician. Thanks for a great episode. Yours, Justin.
Yeah.
Garen writes, I'm getting the one with the tricky words. Greetings, this is Garen from Willamette Valley, Oregon. Willamette is the French adaptation from the Chinook Wawa language of a tribal place namesite near Oregon City. I was curious and looked it up, although there seems to be some debate about the origin. My guess for episode 229 is pinworm or enterobiasis. Symptoms include anal itching, vaginal itching, and sleeplessness. It is a common worm in the US. I remember hearing about this in an early TWiP episode. You can collect the eggs on a piece of tape for diagnosis. Cheers. Shall I do the next one too?
Sure.
It's very short. Tiago writes, hello from Portugal. In the case of the lady with anal parasites, the symptoms are consistent with Enterobius vermicularis, as the females lay their eggs in the elected spot, perianal skin. Probably all the family needs treatment. That could be with albendazole or Pyrantel. Yours sincerely, Tiago.
Christian writes, Dear TWiP team, greetings from London, which is surprisingly sunny. The story of this lady sounds very much like a case of pinworm, Enterobius vermicularis. It is a common ailment transmitted by ingesting contaminated substances, inadequate hand hygiene, and nail biting. The ingested eggs hatch in the duodenum and start migrating towards the colon. Diagnosis can be done via Scotch test, which is done by pressing a piece of Scotch tape on top of the anus, best first thing in the morning, and which will be left on a slide and examined under a microscope for eggs. The eggs can also be found under the fingernails, or, as in this case, as commonly happens, visual proof of the worm is diagnostic. The itch at night in the anal area is caused by the female worm depositing the eggs in this area as oxygen is needed for egg maturation, and then it dies. The itch then can lead to scratching and autoinfection under certain conditions. Infestation of the vagina, though, is usually accidental. The eggs themselves are also very hardy, which makes treatment more complicated, as in this case, the whole family should be treated, including environmental decontamination, washing the underwear, towels, etc., and treatment of pets. The drug that can be used, or the drugs that can be used, are parental pamoate, mebendazole, and albendazole. Ivermectin should work too. What is infuriating in this case is the less than original or less than optimal bedside behavior of the GI doctor. Pinworms are relatively common worldwide, can recur often, and especially a GI specialist should be aware of this parasite. Thank you for the case. Best wishes, Christian.
All right, our last guess is from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club, which of course is Michelle and Alexander, dear friends of Scotch in drink and tape. The patient seems to be suffering from a straightforward case of Enterobius vermicularis infection, also known as pinworm. Not only is the morphology typical, also the intense itching at night is part of the classic presentation. This is caused by female worms migrating out of the colon in order to deposit, or rather disperse, their eggs. While live adults can sometimes be found in stool, the eggs are found via the Scotch tape test, whereby the eggs that adhere to the skin of the anus are transferred onto a slide for microscopic examination via Scotch tape. Enterobius vermicularis can be treated using mebendazole, albendazole, or parental pamoate in 2 single doses, 1 or 2 weeks apart, to completely eradicate the infection and prevent reinfection. In some instances, pinworms migrate to the vagina, causing the patient additional discomfort. However, we would also suggest performing a poppy seed test in this case to rule out the possibility of an anogenital fistula. The helminthic treatment would stay the same. It is sad to hear that this patient was treated in such an unkind manner by her GI doctor. In our opinion, he did not fulfill his responsibility as her treating physician by not ruling out a somatic illness and not taking the patient's complaints and suffering seriously. We are very glad that she has found better care with you, Daniel. Thank you for this great case. All the best, Michelle and Alexander from the First Vienna Parasitology Passion Club. Right. There we have it. And I have a question, Dana. Why isn't the rest of the family infected?
So let's
They probably are, aren't they?
They might be.
Well, let's start with, what do we think it is? So should we we have 4 more guesses. We have AI, Vincent, Dixon, and Christina. So what did AI think?
Okay, here's what AI said. If you're experiencing symptoms such as a white worm-like structure in the anus and vagina, it's important to seek immediate medical attention. There are several potential causes. 1. Pinworms, Enterobius vermicularis. 2. Threadworms, Strongyloides stercoralis. 3. Other parasitic infections, they don't specify. And 4. Hygiene-related issues that can lead to various infections. Do not attempt to self-diagnose or self-treat. Get medical advice.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
What do you think
So-
about that? That's, I mean, it could be
Not
good,
bad.
right?
Not bad. The first one was. We'll get to that.
All right, go
Yeah,
ahead.
so let's go through. Maybe Christina, you want to go, and then
Yep, sure.
okay.
So I I do sometimes have a little bit of tunnel vision when we're diagnosing our cases because I'm a parasitologist, and then I tend to home in right on those. But I think that was quite appropriate maybe in this instance. I did try really hard to come up with a really broad differential, but I just couldn't really come up with all that many. So I kind of thought very quickly of Enterobius vermicularis infection, and really what the reason why I thought about this is so she has that itching that wakes her up in the night. Although she did not report this for earlier episodes, I don't think, or at least we don't know. But the Enterobius may not cause itching on first infection, because this is caused by an allergic reaction to the worm proteins. So it's not actually the worm that moves around that makes you itch, but an allergic reaction, I think. Obviously, the itching could also be caused by dermatitis or other infections or hemorrhoids or minor leakage. But I think in the combination with the little thin white motile things that she described, with an end coming to a point, I am fairly confident of my diagnosis of Enterobius vermicularis. I think the shape, although we don't have much detail, but it does kind of describe the female worm quite well when you have a look at it on the photographs. So yeah, I think that would be my diagnosis. I do have some more notes, but I think I'll just leave that for now and maybe come back to them later.
And who wants next, Vincent or Dixon?
I'll go if you want. I agree with Dr. Nola. A sterling diagnosis. I think it was, well, unfortunately, I've got so much experience at lecturing about this organism that, and it was always the first one of the class that we led off with because it was the easiest one to understand. So, yeah, it's pinworm. Definitely pinworm. Now, the question as to why the other kids were not infected, who said they weren't infected? No one did any tests on them, so I suspect that they're all infected.
Let's see. Let's look at the case description here. I'm sure we asked Daniel that, if the family was okay,
They could be okay.
They may not have symptoms because they may not have itching. If they're not itchy, then...
Exactly.
And little kids always scratch their bottoms anyway, whether they're itchy or not. They're probably going to progressing the infection.
I think adults scratch their bottoms too,
yes,
Christina.
That's true. You're right.
That's a good question. We'll address that.
Okay.
Vincent, what do you think?
I thought, based on the morphology of the worm and the presence and the itching, the worm comes out of the intestine, and then that's very close to the vaginal opening, and so the worms can go up there as well. And so I thought pinworm, yes. Enterobius vermicularis. I just remembered Dixon's lecture on that very vividly.
Well, let me ask a couple questions to sort of explain a few things. So why is this not hookworm? And Dixon, maybe you can tell. Why is this not? Why is it? Yeah.
I think it's not hookworm because hookworm adults don't migrate out the anus and cause itching. They cause anemia. And so it can't be Ascaris because Ascaris could migrate out the anus, but it's an organism the size of a ballpoint pen. You wouldn't confuse that for a pinworm. So the description of this, when you gave it originally, I had to control myself. I said, how could you do this? This is such an easy no-brainer. And yet we had people guessing on the parasites too. So that's fine. That's absolutely fine. It's a good teaching tool to go through the life cycles and to understand why it's important. I would have loved to have heard more about the cycles of her itching, because pinworms take 6 weeks to develop. And very often they become synchronized, and then you get an itching at a certain time of the month, and they begin to relate that to some other things like, oh yeah, we used to have spaghetti on Wednesdays on the last day of the week or something like this. And no, these are the parasites going through their normal synchronized life cycle. And I think the person who was talking about you acquire this by eating all kinds of other things. I don't know where they got that information from, but if you don't eat the egg, you don't get the parasite. Although there is retroinfection of adults actually migrating back up into the anus, and then the eggs are laid, and then they hatch, and then they reestablish. So there's all kinds of permutations here.
Yeah. So for me, this was well, I think pretty straightforward, right? I get to actually see a video of an adult female pinworm, and
amazing.
What was it when you see a pinworm, you know what it is, right?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
So, like, you're showing me a movie of an adult female pinworm. And the history already was quite compelling, and then seeing the video. Okay, so here we have. You don't need to do any Scotch tape tests. But I think a couple things to start with is, one is, as we saw, this woman has been having, this is a real case that I saw recently. This woman's been having this issue for 6 years.
Right.
And has been, interacting with multiple medical professionals and not having this properly diagnosed, properly treated, properly addressed, right? So I think that's as amazing as this. Here, we all very obviously, we know what this is. Oh my gosh, how can you throw such an easy, what is it, like a softball or something?
This is a low-hanging fruit if I ever saw one.
And we saw all our people emailing in, and the majority of them very quickly, this is what it is. So one of the reasons I think it was important to present this was first to just point out that the teaching of parasitology is so poorly neglected now in our medical training that what should be something that the lay person is familiar with, something that's treated over the counter, 6 years of not being properly managed, and then this very negative interaction. Now, the other couple things I wanted to bring up was this issue. So she's the only one, supposedly, at different points in time, who has this issue. Like, how does that work? And I guess I'll just jump in and address that. So, as some of our emailers wrote, like, that actually happens. Not everybody has this symptomatic presentation, but they've all got pinworm.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the tough thing is, we talk about the family. Well, she's got this housekeeper who basically comes there all the time. So that housekeeper is also in the environment too. So the housekeeper's got pinworm. The housekeeper's family's got pinworm. Her family's got pinworm. Pinworm is very common. So there is this constant reinfection issue. But then I think that part of the treatment here is right when she was initially symptomatic back in 2018, and she ends up getting treatment at that point, which she took something over the counter. She only took something over the counter once. And then a few years later, the housekeeper, she gets one thing once again. So maybe we could talk a little bit about the life cycle, as some of our emailers did. Like, why is one treatment not enough? Why do people treat again in 2 to 3 weeks? And why do some people treat again in 2 to 3 weeks? And why do we treat everybody?
They're probably residual environmental things that are going to reinfect everyone, right?
Yeah, so that's the big thing with pinworm. And the pinworm is actually one of the most most beautiful, magnificent organisms in the natural world. And I wonder why they do all these like silly documentaries on like turtles and stuff that sort of lumber up the beach, because the female pinworm is one of the most heroic creatures on the planet, right? So she lives there in really just not a great place, but the place that she knows where she can get her nutrients. It's going to be the right place to put those eggs, right? In the rectum, coming out. And she, and think how little she is, right? So she migrates up, she comes out into this oxygen-rich environment. She doesn't just lay the egg, she actually everts her uterus with this eversion, which is so strong that it will throw those eggs, will aerosolize them. They'll go about 3 feet through the air. I'm not sure aerosolize is the right word, but she will spray them, and then to accomplish this reproductive act, it results in her own death. So incredibly, sacrificial, really appropriate as we're recording this on International Women's Day, because the female pinworm is one of the most heroic females on the planet. But those eggs are really durable. They can actually maintain their infectivity for 2 to 3 weeks in the environment. So they're all over the place. You treat this lady, but then you send her and everyone else you treat back into this environment full of these robust eggs, which they can then ingest. The life cycle can start again. And so the reason we treat again in 2 to 3 weeks is that you can count on the fact that these individuals are going to be reinfected after that treatment. The treatment is not going to destroy all the eggs in the environment. In 2 to 3 weeks, you will actually start to have the hatching and the larvae from the eggs, but it takes about 4 to 6 weeks before the next cycle, before the females are able to produce more eggs. So thus critical that you jump in at 2 to 3 weeks. And in some cases where the infestation is significant, sometimes we'll even do another treatment in 2 to 3. So you don't want to beat people up too much and talk to them about hygiene, because there is no way to rid your environment of all these eggs. They're everywhere. They're on the walls, they're on the sheets, they're under the fingernails, they're all over the place. So, and that's one of the things I worry about sometimes is people get, oh, well, it's because you keep reinfecting. It's a hygiene issue. You got to cut those nails short, et cetera. It's just not something that you can do. So the series of treatments and the treating everybody, because those kids, that husband, they may not have symptoms, but they do have infection and they can contribute to this recurrence.
The other thing I'd like to add to that, Daniel, and that was a great description, by the way, thank you, is that the immature larvae, the L1s through L3, are not susceptible to the drug. So it takes them about 6 weeks to grow up.
Yeah.
So you have to interrupt their life cycles periodically with the drug in order to catch all the fully mature worms. I want to relate an anecdote also, which is I learned this while I was a technician. Almost my first maybe 3 weeks at this laboratory, which turned out to be a hotbed of information that you could take with you for the rest of your life. And I took this one also. I love telling this to the medical students. There are situations where people that are coming into the clinic, they don't speak very good English. And so they have translators now that will interface with that. But in the old days, we didn't have translators. There wasn't enough time or enough money. Maybe it was the money problem. So we had a demonstration as to how to do a diagnostic test for pinworm. And we had a dummy doll, a little doll, and it was fully dressed. And we would demonstrate, we would take the family and sit them down, and then they would watch. And we'd get out the sticky paddles that we had, and we would then undress the doll and apply the sticky tape or the sticky paddle to the proper area. And then we would wrap it back down along the slide that came with it, look at it under the microscope and make the diagnosis. And you have to go home and do this for your children. You have to take this paddle test about every other day for maybe 2 weeks, and then bring them all back, and we'll read the tests and we'll treat everybody that's infected. Well, this whole family apparently was diagnosed originally as being infected because of their symptoms. So we knew that this was a pretty easy diagnosis. So away they go, and 4 weeks later they come back, and we read the paddles, and the only person that's infected was the person who came into the clinic to begin with. Nobody else was infected. So we wondered, what the heck is going on here? We're almost positive that everybody else is infected. I wonder what happened to the instructions. And actually nothing happened to the instructions. They followed them to the letter. They went out to the Woolworths, which was across the street from the clinic, and they bought a doll, and they dressed it up, and they brought the paddles home, and every morning they would lift up the dress of the doll and apply the paddles to the doll, and then they would do this for 2 weeks. And then they rested, and then they did it for another 2 weeks, and they brought him in. Of course, the doll was negative, and all the kids were positive. And so it really does matter that you make a different way of describing this. Maybe a small educational video would be good now, but in the old days, we didn't have the luxury of that. So that family was actually diagnosed on the spot, and we treated them all, of course. But I always love telling that story because the students realize that half of their patients are non-English speakers.
Right.
So they've got to say something. They've got to find another way of communicating this information.
I wanted to go back to something that one of our readers wrote. One of our writers mentioned that pets needed to be treated. And I wanted to point out that actually Enterobius only infects humans, or this particular species only infects humans.
Right.
So actually that infection, this particular Enterobius species, is not zoonotic. But I mean, pinworms are found in many other species.
Absolutely.
And they're actually, each of them are quite specific for one host, which I really quite find interesting.
Yeah.
What makes a parasite host specific and what makes it a bit more promiscuous? I think that's quite an interesting topic, maybe to explore in the future. And actually, one of our readers mentioned a horse pinworm, and I've looked that one up as well, Oxyuris equi, and I think actually Enterobius vermicularis used to be called Oxyuris vermicularis before it was renamed. So quite confusing, really.
I meant to also say one other thing. The picture in our book of the adult female, I believe, I totally agree with Daniel. It's a classic nematode. That's got all of the proper parts. It's got 2 esophageal bulbs. It's got a complete gut tract. It's got reproductive organs, everything else. But I didn't have a microscope that you could take the entire worm at once. So I took a series of pictures. And the most fun I ever had was 2 days worth of stitching those pictures together to make sure that this represented the entire pinworm adult. And it occupies the entire length of the page, as you'll see. For that person who didn't get the book, you can look it up on the PDF version. But I really, truly enjoyed showcasing the structure of that nematode because it applied to all the other nematodes in the chapter as well.
I just wanted to correct myself, actually. You know how I said Enterobius vermicularis is very host specific and it only infects humans. But I did actually find a couple of reports in the scientific literature of fatal reports of Enterobius vermicularis infection in captive chimpanzees. So they have their own pinworm, which has got a very complicated name that I'm not trying to stumble over. But I guess, there is maybe a little bit of leeway with host specificity. And also in the wild, I suppose chimpanzees and people don't cross paths very often. But I did find that quite interesting. That
By the
actually...
way, mice are lucky. They've got 2 species of pinworms that they can be infected with. And part of my early jobs working as a technician was to find out which cages had which pinworms. They were all given the same drug. It didn't really matter. In those days, it was an older drug, but prantopamoate was what they gave them. One was called Cyphacia obvolata, and I cannot, for the life of me, think of the other species, but it wasn't similar to that, but it was part of the Oxyurids family.
Yeah, and maybe the last thing to make sure we throw in diagnostically, what if that GI doc had decided to take her seriously and ordered a oven parasites? What would have happened there, Dixon? I see you chuckling.
No, don't ask me. Ask somebody else.
Yeah, well, the reason I bring that up is that the stool oven parasites tend to be negative. These tend to stick. So the sensitivity of a stool oven parasite is not very good for this. So that in many ways that can be worse. They say, well, all right, we'll send off 3 stool oven parasites. They come back negative, and then they get discounted more. So it's important to understand how to make the diagnosis. And I have to say, in our area, it's very hard to get a paddle test. So quite a challenge.
It is shocking that the doctor laughed at her. I do kind of find that
horrible,
really awful, really awful. I hope she's changing doctors.
She did. She went to Daniel.
I think she did.
She did, that's right, yeah.
Yeah, it's horrible. Agreed.
It's totally inappropriate.
No, I think when that happens, maybe you need a little re-education, Daniel, right?
Yeah.
All right, it's time to give away a book.
Right.
We had 11 guesses, as far as I could tell. Let's pick a random number between 1 and 11. It is number 3. Wow. All the way at the top there. That is Byron, who said, "Thank you again for everything you do to educate the public. Knowledge is priceless." Well, thank you, Byron. You have won. So please, you're in Naperville, Illinois. Perfect. Send your address to TWiP@microbe.tv, and we will ship you an autographed copy of the 7th edition of Parasitic Diseases. Thanks for your answers. All right. Do we have a hero today?
So while you're looking for that, I think we should mention that in our latest update to our textbook, we have increased the number of heroes, and Anne Bishop is one of the heroes that is now in our latest edition.
Right.
And I think we actually have in our index, right? We have somewhere where we actually
gotta be there
tell you where
someplace.
to find
It's not
that.
in the main index.
Really?
Let's see.
No, but maybe just a hero index.
Well, I think we did have a hero index, but we'll have to correct that because that's important for people to be able to look these things up.
Let me see from our beginning, because I feel like that was something I did in our front. Is I put a where to find the different.
Find her. Page
Oh,
good.
56.
Page 53.
56.
Well, I'm sorry, page 56.
That's okay. Just in case you wanted to look it up as well.
All right.
So, shall I read it out?
Please.
Sure.
So, Anne Bishop, she was born in 1899 and died in 1990, so she had a very long life. Dr. Bishop, she began her work with ciliate parasites and worked on therapeutics for amoebic diseases. She went on to discover several new parasitic species. Bishop is most famous for her work on Plasmodium and early studies on drug resistance in this group of parasites. She was also committed to helping other women pursue their educational ambitions, and in 1945 helped to organise the Girton College Working Women's Summer School. Dr. Bishop not only contributed to the science of parasitology, but is also credited as one of the individuals largely responsible for the creation of the British Society of Parasitology. Her commitment to the advancement of young parasitologists led to the creation of the Anne Bishop Travelling Award, supporting young parasitologists travelling for field work.
I think that's very appropriate on International Women's Day, particularly her work at not only excelling herself, but bringing up others.
Absolutely.
All right, great. And finally, Daniel, do we have another case, or have you run out?
We do, and actually, this is a recent one. This is from yesterday. How about that? Very recent. So the story is a physician with no significant past medical history, currently doing their fellowship training, develops diarrhea. That diarrhea is significant enough that they're beginning to feel weak, lightheaded, and actually end up going to the local emergency room. A little bit more about this individual. The physician lives in New York City, works most of the time, but did just get back from a week-long vacation in Florida with their long-term sexual partner. So we sort of don't have a lot of other sexual exposures, just to help with that, where they got a chance to swim in the pool, get some sun, and actually get a little bit of rest. They returned feeling well and then noted the onset of diarrhea. The diarrhea was watery with some abdominal cramping, but no noted blood or actual fever. The diarrhea was pretty significant, right? Because the person is going to end up in the ER dehydrated. The stool did not have a strong smell. There's no floating stools. The physician was given IV fluids, returns home feeling a little bit better after this, but then gets a call that there's a parasite on the stool testing and is recommended to take a medicine they have never heard of, 3 times per day for 3 days. So I will, as this is a parasite. Any other questions from the crowd?
They went to Florida, right?
They went to South Florida. It was warm, sunny. They were out in the pool.
What did they
Interesting
eat?
that they went swimming in the pool, but they didn't actually describe swimming in the ocean.
Right. And did they eat at restaurants or what?
Yep, ate at restaurants. There were no, dietary restrictions, no sort of interesting, just, eating, breakfast at the hotel and then going out to restaurants, etc.
Is the physician HIV negative?
They are HIV negative. Yeah. And as mentioned, they're in this long-term monogamous relationship.
Supposedly.
And they both got it.
Supposedly.
Well, you never know, right? People don't tell you the truth.
That is right.
We don't know if the partner engaged in the same risky behavior that this physician engaged in.
There's risky behavior. We don't know, really. Yes, we don't.
Yeah, they did something that I would never do, but we'll talk about that next time when we.
Okay.
That's remarkable to hear that from you, Daniel, because you've done a lot of things that I wouldn't do.
Yeah, like swim in Lake Victoria or whatever.
But I towed off risky right afterward.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter.
Oh my
I
gosh!
wouldn't do it. I just wouldn't do it.
So the
Crocodiles.
Daniel, both have diarrhea. They're both sick.
No, just.
I thought they were both sick. I'm sorry.
No, just the physician. He's the one who got sick.
Just the physician.
Partner's fine.
Are we sure he's not imagining what he has? You know how physicians
he did
do,
when
right?
he went to the ER. First, they laughed at him, ridiculed him, but then when they saw that he was hypotensive and dehydrated, no, I'm joking.
Would you consider modifying then the sentence that reads, "They returned feeling well and then noticed the onset of the diarrhea"?
That's what's kind of throwing me, too.
I think you should say, and then one of them noticed that.
Oh, I was using the gender-neutral they. So
Well,
you
that's
don't know
too
whether
bad.
this was a male or female. It's 2024, Dixon.
No, that's not the point. Then one of them developed diarrhea.
Well, no, how about I say the physician returned feeling well.
The physician.
But you've now learned that
I see what you're talking about. I see what you're talking about. No, I got you. It's a gay couple. Okay, that's fine.
I haven't said that, but
he hasn't said that, but you couldn't. Yeah, you don't know.
Inferred. Is it inferred?
No, I don't think it is. I don't think
pronoun
it
that you've used?
Not part of the history.
No, not at all.
Not important.
It's just a physician who went down to Florida with their long-term partner, and
Yep. Okay.
Could be. And did they have any mosquito or tick bites while they were there?
Sure they did. Ticks probably not, but it's South Florida. It's this time of year.
Did they lie on a beach where dogs are allowed to poop?
Good question, but no, they actually, mainly were hanging out at the pool.
Did they eat any raw ocean sea life?
It's a good question. We don't know.
We don't know. Now you know.
I know. We don't.
You do know. You do know. You're just not talking.
So how long after the return did the diarrhea develop?
That's a good question.
So it was, I'm going to say, you ready for this? Less than 10 days.
Okay.
Yes. Roger that.
Less than 10 days. Okay.
And
We
you
get,
have
so
a
many,
point
we get
at the
so
end
many hints on this show.
Yeah,
Does
they're
it
week
have a
long.
point at the end of the tail?
All right. I think that's good. We've asked enough questions, right?
I agree.
Okay. That is TWiP 231. Show notes, microbe.tv/TWiP. You can send your guesses for the cases to twip@microbe.tv. So you have 2 weeks. So this episode is going to drop on a week from today, which is the 15th of March.
Oh, the Ides of March.
And then you have, I think you have 2 weeks.
The
2
5th
weeks.
of April is when we will be
Returning.
and interesting. I'm going to be almost in your time zone, Christina. I'm going to be in Denmark.
Oh my
Okay.
gosh.
Oh, lovely place.
I think it's would
Can
be
I
like
come?
10 for you, 11 for me, something like
Can I
that.
come?
So
So we're recording again on the 5th, but this
I think this
Oh.
will be the 4 weeks from now, right? Because 2
Okay,
weeks
4
is
weeks.
a guest and then 4 weeks. So you have until the 5th of April. That's
5th
when
of
we
April.
will
There
do
you
it.
go. 5th of April. But please submit a guest. TWiP at microbe.tv. If you enjoy our work, please consider supporting us financially at microbe.tv/contribute. Daniel Griffin is at Columbia University Irving Medical Center, parasiteswithoutborders.com. Thank you, Daniel.
Oh, thank you.
Dixon de Pommier, trichinella.org, thelivingriver.org. Thank you, Dixon.
Welcome, Vincent.
Christina Nell is at the University of Glasgow. Thank you, Christina.
Well, thank you. It's always a good way to spend the Friday evening coming on TWiP.
Yes, what is it? Scotch and tape? How did
Yes,
they put
that's
it?
right.
I might go for the
Scotch.
white wine, just, you know.
Scotch in drink and tape. I love it. They always
Yeah,
come
that
up
was
with a
fun.
cute introduction. I'm Vincent Racaniello. You can find me at microbe.tv. I'd like to thank the American Society for Microbiology for their support of TWiP and Ronald Jenkins for the music. You've been listening to This Week in Parasitism. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Another TWiP is
Is
parasitic.
parasitic.